Zerlina Maxwell and Leslie Sanchez are with us. I'd also like to bring in Zeke Miller in Washington and Michael Graham in Boston. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and a White House reporter for Time. Michael is a CBSN political contributor and columnist for the Boston Herald. Welcome to you all. Zeke, I'd like to start with you. You cover the White House day in, day out. What stood out to you the most from the president's comments?
Obviously, his sharp criticism of Pakistan is sort of the most policy-forward, sort of substantive change here from the president, sort of a change in the rhetoric from an American president that we're not quite used to. But sort of tonally from the president, we saw him talk about his instinct and his gut being wrong. And there was a little bit of a verbal jiu-jitsu he was playing there, saying that it was both his instinct was, it was an admission from him that his instinct was wrong, that he wanted to pull U.S. troops out. That was always what he wanted to do, but that he is ceded to the recommendations of his generals, sort of the entire U.S. foreign policy establishment pretty much, that Afghanistan is a persistent problem that will take a very long time to solve. And then finally, just his definition of victory didn't really seem like a very finite one. There was no, we're going to take back this territory, we're going to do, there was no obvious accomplishment. It would have to do more with killing terrorists, which is sort of something that could be a persistent problem that will keep U.S. troops in Afghanistan with no end in sight.
Michael, what do you think? This notion of the president talking about his instincts and essentially, as Zeke pointed out, acknowledging that his first instinct was wrong.
Nothing's more strange in this era we live in than Donald Trump acting like a regular politician. And this was very much a presidential speech. There are a lot of pieces of the speech that President Obama could have given. Of course, there were some that you couldn't. I know that a lot of conservatives will be heartened to hear President Trump making the case for what a mistake it was for President Obama, for example, to leave Iraq and not reach an arrangement for our forces to stay there, and how different things would have been the past 6 or 7 years if we had been there instead of ISIS. So you've got that part for the kind of, maybe neocon or traditional Republicans. But I think that for a lot of conservatives watching at home, they sensed that the sentence that Donald Trump meant more than anything else he said is, we are not going to be nation building. We are going to be killing terrorists, not nation building. And that seems to be the kind of psychological line that the Trump allies have. They really want to kill terrorists. They really don't want to build roads in Afghanistan. They want to build roads in Alabama and Arizona.
Leslie, yeah, let me ask you, how do you think that particular part of the message is going to be received, just as Michael laid out?
It was there was a bit of political maneuvering, no doubt, in that speech for him to show, yes, the humility, but say he is going against what he promised. He promised that he would be pulling out of Afghanistan. He's been railing on this for years, and now he's making a different case, but he's leading, I think, the public along that path and that line of thinking. And absolutely true that Republicans are going to be seeing a sigh of relief and refreshed by the direct talk on Pakistan. That's something they've waited for a very long time, and it looks at the heart of and the rise of these terrorist cells. So on that sense, I think he's going to get very strong marks from Republicans and independents who want to see that type of strong talk and strong action.
All right, I want to bring in Major Garrett. He's at Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia. And Major, what was your impression? You had an opportunity to talk to senior administration officials ahead of this speech. What stood out to you?
Well, there's this very intense branding effort to say this is a brand new, comprehensive, totally reimagined approach to Afghanistan and Pakistan. That's a lot of words, but fundamentally, this is not altogether different. This is not the first American president who's thought, wow, wouldn't it be much better for us if the Pakistanis did not provide safe haven to the Taliban or the Haqqani networks? President Obama did, President Bush did that. President Obama, in the last 3 years, has cut aid to Pakistan by 60%. What effect has it had? Zero effect on changing Pakistan's intelligence services orientation to protecting or giving safe haven to the Taliban and the Haqqani network. That's just point one. Point two. The president says we're no longer nation building in Afghanistan. Does that mean a cessation of every dollar that's not devoted to military operations? Probably not. The State Department, the Commerce Department, lots of different parts of the federal government have lots of money plowed into projects already in Afghanistan that are still nearing completion. It would not be helpful to this fragile Afghan government, a unity government that is sort of held together uneasily on a day-to-day basis for the United States to pull out any development assistance of any kind. That's a complicating factor there as well. The president didn't say how many troops he was going to authorize to be moved into Afghanistan. The word we get from the Pentagon and from the White House is it goes up to about 4,000, whatever Defense Secretary James Mattis believes is operationally most effective. He's been given that authority and he's had it since June. Why hasn't the Defense Secretary moved? Because he was waiting for this speech. He was not going to put more U.S. military personnel into Afghanistan without a strategy embraced publicly by the president and without the public hearing the president say, I thought about withdrawing from Afghanistan, but I decided against it. We're going to try to assist the Afghan government and we're going to try to win on our terms. What are those terms? Defeating terrorism and seeing if the United States and its Afghan military partners can force enough military defeats on the Taliban to encourage them to come to peace negotiations. Guess what? That was also the strategy of the Obama administration. And I just want to end with this, Elaine. I was with President Obama December 1st, 2009 at West Point Military Academy. That speech was about a 30,000 U.S. troop surge into Afghanistan. Robert Gibbs, the press secretary then, told all White House reporters, this is a means by which to end the war in Afghanistan. We're not going to be there, this is a direct quote, 8 or 9 years from now. Not only are we still there, but an American president is weighed the idea of leaving, decided to stay, and has essentially made, for all practical purposes, a commitment that will last through his entire first term.
All right. Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett for us. Major, thanks very much. Zerlina Maxwell, I want to turn to you. What we heard from Major there was a laying out of the complex geopolitical landscape. You heard him talk about the parallels between what we heard from this president, President Trump, and President Obama. Let's go ahead and actually play a soundbite from President Trump earlier in which he talks about the situation he actually found as he entered the Oval Office regarding Afghanistan.
No one denies that we have inherited a challenging and troubling situation in Afghanistan and South Asia, but we do not have the luxury of going back in time and making different or better decisions. When I became president, I was given a bad and very complex hand, but I fully knew what I was getting into, big and intricate problems. But one way or another, these problems will be solved. I'm a problem solver. And in the end, we will win.
All right, so Zerlina, how much of what we heard from President Trump, you think, was the realization and an acknowledgement of just how complicated the geopolitical landscape is?
I think most of the speech tonight was essentially Donald Trump realizing what perhaps most of military experts and all the rest of us know, is that this is complicated. So I think during the campaign, and when you're campaigning, this is always true, you simplify things down to message to your base and to your supporters. And so it's a lot easier when you're running for president to say, well, we should get out of Afghanistan, or as he tweeted in 2013, you know, what President Obama is doing is wrong, pull out now, right? It's always easier to talk about what you think President Obama is doing wrong than to be the president yourself. And so I think today is the first day that Donald Trump actually had to say, well, I was wrong about something and I've decided to go a different way. What I didn't hear tonight was specifics, though, and that's what I was actually waiting to hear. I need to know more about what you're going to do in Afghanistan, not just the goals you're trying to reach. I need to know how you're going to actually reach them. And I think the critique of Pakistan and also including India in that, without necessarily acknowledging the history between those two countries, was also, I think, a very interesting and strange moment, because I'm not sure that he really understands that fully. Certainly there are people that are working for him that do, but I think that that's a lot more complicated than that perhaps he presented in his speech tonight.
So, Leslie, let me ask you, in addition to the president's plans for Afghanistan, he also took the opportunity at the beginning of his remarks to try to strike a more conciliatory tone than perhaps his critics have accused him of having in the past in the wake of the violence in Charlottesville. Let's go ahead and play a little bit of that portion of the president's remarks.
When one part of America hurts, we all hurt. And when one citizen suffers an injustice, we all suffer together. Loyalty to our nation demands loyalty to one another. Love for America requires love for all of its people. When we open our hearts to patriotism, there is no room for prejudice, no place for bigotry, and no tolerance for hate. The young men and women we send to fight our wars abroad deserve to return to a country that is not at war with itself at home. We cannot remain a force for peace in the world if we are not at peace with each other. As we send our bravest to defeat our enemies overseas, and we will always win, let us find the courage to heal our divisions within. Let us make a simple promise to the men and women we ask to fight in our name, that when they return home from battle, they will find a country that has renewed the sacred bonds of love and loyalty that unite us together as one.
All right, so I want to go around and get some reactions, starting with you, Leslie. This was a much different tone than we'd heard from the president on this particular issue in recent days.
Very true. I mean, it goes to the old adage, armies divided will fall. He bookended his speech on that message of unity. We talk a lot about love in this administration. I just want to point that out. We use this word love. We're all in love. It's his favorite, one of his favorite words. But he brought that to the table again. And what's interesting, I think in watching him, there are numerous occasions going back to the campaign when he first started using the teleprompter, and now you see it again, when he needs to get serious, when he has to really get a point across, and in some cases, he's in that damage control mode and really needs to bring things together and calm kind of the next step in the administration. He really is measured in tone, and I think that's what we saw here, and it will benefit him, and it will benefit everyone as they're looking at this new strategy.
Michael, what did you think?
Well, I thought that it was interesting that he would make a really strategic political decision to use a call for patriotism to kind of pour water on the fire that he started with Charlottesville. I mean, it was an interesting political jiu-jitsu. It was kind of clever, actually, for what we've seen from the Trump White House. And it's it's an argument, a strong argument in and of itself that, hey, we're here we are fighting each other, and we're asking young men to go out and fight for us abroad. But at the same time, I just don't think the Afghan war issue resonates, particularly with his base. I asked a conservative grassroots person earlier today, what are you hoping to hear from Donald Trump? And he said, we're not worried about the Afghanistan war. We're fighting the culture war. And so I don't think you're going to see a lot of kumbaya singing in the wake of the Afghanistan policy, however many troops the president decides to send.
Zeke, what do we know about how that speech was crafted? I know it's early yet and people are still digesting it, but do we have a sense who was involved in writing that speech?
I mean, it's everyone from Stephen Miller to H.R. McMaster on some of the policy side of things. John Kelly, Sarah Sanders, others in the comm shop were very involved as well. But the broader point here is that this speech itself took, is a result of a more than 6-month policy process to get to this point. And really is the only thing going on in the Trump administration that has had quite as intense and structured a process, because it was run by the Pentagon, by the State Department, and the National Security Council, for all of its faults, is the most stable part of this very shaky administration right now. And the broader point is, can we extrapolate from this performance or this delivery from the president, a somewhat sober-minded speech talking about a controversial issue, trying to smooth over his unforced error and divisive comments last week, and extrapolate out, will this signal some sort of change for the president? And really, this is the only thing in the pipeline that has gone through this sort of intensive process within the National Security Council that has got the buy-in from his aides, brought the president to be disciplined to that issue. And right now, there doesn't seem to be other things like that along the lines, coming down the line. Yes, John Kelly's just taken over, and maybe he can change that. But this is certainly a positive night for the president. But the question is he really set up to have more of these going forward?
Yeah, that's a really good question. My thanks to the panel here.